I'm Andrea, a passionate DEI advocate and consultant on a mission. Join me in each episode as we celebrate diversity, ignite conversations, and craft workplaces and educational institutions where everyone thrives. This podcast is my commitment to making a meaningful impact on the world of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So are you ready? Let's get Diversifused. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Get Diversifused. I'm your host, Andrea Horton-Mericli, founder of Diversifuse DEI Consulting and a passionate DEI advocate and ally. This episode is all about empowering marginalized communities and developing conscious leaders. My guest speaker today is Kawtar el Alaoui. Kawtar is a multi-award-winning consultant, coach, facilitator, and speaker. She is also the founder and CEO of Conscious Togetherness based in Canada. Her work supports conscious leaders and organizations to create socially responsible leadership structures without sacrificing the bottom line. Her work bridges purpose, whole brain leadership, and effective strategy while increasing well-being and flow within teams. Kawtar's leadership model is unique in its adaptability to different cultural contexts, in being trauma-informed and equity-driven. She is the best-selling author of this fabulous book here. I was talking to her about it, how much I loved it. Unfolding Peace, 9 Leadership Principles to Create Cultures of Well-Being, Belonging, and Peace. I will be putting the title of the book in the summary of our podcast today so you can get a copy for yourselves. And with that, I welcome Kawtar to Get Diversifused.
Thank you so much, Andrea. Thank you for having me. I'm excited for this conversation today.
Me too. So, first of all, since I started talking about your book a little bit, where can people get your book? And is it offered on Kindle or Nook? Do they still sell Nook? And I'm not sure, but Kindle, yeah. Is it? No? Okay.
It's definitely on Amazon.com. It's available globally. In Canada, it's also available in certain stores at Indigo, which is a chain, Indigo Chapters. And otherwise, I think Amazon is really the best way.
Okay, that's where I got my copy. But I'll definitely check your local bookstores in your communities because we want to support local businesses in your areas. So, Kawtar, can you share more about your background and journey in supporting conscious leadership and empowering marginalized communities? I know. Well, first of all, before you answer that question, tell us about your story. You really go into it pretty in depth in the book, but can you give the listeners a little summary about your story and what prompted you to write this book?
Yeah,
and create Conscious Togetherness.
Yeah, thank you, Andrea. Gosh, my story, I would say, has been a story about trying to figure out how do we create harmony in life? How do we create harmony in our own personal life, in interpersonal relationships, and certainly in workplaces? I'm the child of a bicultural child, and that means that I was born in Morocco. I immigrated to Canada relatively early. So my values, my worldview were shaped by 2 cultures at the same time. And what I didn't realize, and I think you'll probably recognize a little bit of this, Andrea, from your own journey. What I didn't realize is how much living with 2 different sets of cultural values and 2 different worldviews can create inner conflicts. And so when I graduated from law school and started working, I kind of was caught back by my baggage, my cultural baggage, and how much it had shaped my identity as a woman. At the time, I didn't understand systemic racism, much less have language for it. And yet I experienced it very, I would say, severely. It kind of really shattered my professional life twice before I figured out what was happening. And the impact of that was a lot of trauma. And so between figuring out sort of toxic leadership and, toxic relationships and systemic racism, it kind of led me down this path very early on in my career of having seen what doesn't work and being left without a model or a roadmap for what works. And so my life took me in this deep dive into what is it that actually works? And I realized it wasn't in law at the time. The models weren't yet there,
Hmm.
at least that I could find. Right? There's this big gap between equality and equity. And so,
Yes. Which
that
people often get confused between the two
absolutely.
terms. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And it's unfortunate that we're still confused about that in this day and
mhm.
age.
Yeah.
But I mean, the difference is there. And so, having realized all of that, like looking at, okay, so the answers are not in law. Now what? And
Hmm.
so I looked into alternative things like at first mediation and then coaching. Um, I also looked at cross cultural training just by my own life journey, and also because I lived globally. And so
Hmm.
I came to work with teams and leaders in global settings and, really a wide variety of cultures and backgrounds and worldviews, and working in projects where we had to find some form of harmony below all those differences. Um, and so that's kind of been my life journey and what brought me to figure out that what unites us or what's common about us as humans is actually much bigger, I believe, than the divisions or the separations. I
Hmm.
think where we really make a big mistake is when we start to negate our differences. And I
Yes.
think that's where we cause a lot of trapped energy and trauma and, recreation of trauma rather than move into harmony together.
Yeah, I agree. And it's also we assuming the worst. As humans, we tend to jump to conclusions and assume the worst instead of stepping back. And you mentioned this sort of in your book, like you step back and pause before you react and respond. Um,
Absolutely.
and and just as many humans, us as humans, we tend not to do that, especially when we're in the moment. Um,
Mhm.
and the differences is what makes us, at least to me, a beautiful race. Where the human race is beautiful. And
Yeah,
I often in
absolutely.
my mind I like to compare. You might kind of laugh at this or say what, compare the beauty of the human race and all its different colors and cultures and languages um, and just personalities and all, and to cooking. You know,
Mm, yeah,
we've all had
yeah,
bland
absolutely.
food, flavorless food, right? What makes it
Absolutely.
more delicious and appealing and satisfying is spices. You know, so,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I often use that analogy with my husband, especially when we're talking about colonization and decolonization.
oh yeah. So is your husband a native Canadian or?
Yes, he is. He's second generation Canadian of
Oh,
European descent. And so, as you might imagine, we've delved very, very deeply into the field of cross cultural differences together,
hmm.
navigating the landscape of both our backgrounds, creating harmony between the two, and, learning to respect and even acknowledge our differences.
Yeah. It's the same with my husband and I, who's Turkish, and so as we were speaking a little bit before the podcast started, I told you that I lived and worked in Turkey, and just experiencing that culture as an expat, which you have a lot of experience with as well,
Mhm.
with your husband being a diplomat. It's interesting because it I wouldn't say it humbles you as a person, but it opens up your mind to different experiences and different ways of doing things and thinking about things, and that it lets
Mhm.
you realize that there's no one way to get from A to B. There's
Absolutely.
many right ways. So
Absolutely. I think
yeah,
that is the credit of cross cultural experiences when we're open to
mhm,
them.
yeah,
Uh, and I think it really confronts us. For myself, it was confronting at first to be put in front of these situations where people had completely different worldviews. And from my cultural lens, I had judgments about them.
yeah,
And so I've had to learn to kind of find harmony with that and to second guess myself and really inquire into why is it that I believe this? And does it truly make sense to me? And there are things that I still hold on to, and then there are things
Hmm.
that I've had to be flexible with and even change because they
Yeah,
make more sense in the long term.
yeah, yeah. I mean, to your question is, why do I believe this? I mean, as we all have our own beliefs and tendencies and implicit biases, and we're like, why do I believe this, or why do I feel this way? Like an automatic response. One, as we all know, we're the family has a lot to do with it, and the culture, but media and Hollywood or whatever platform that you watch videos on has a lot to do with
Mhm.
it. Whatever gets ratings, they're going to do more of, whether it's right or wrong, and whether it's fact or fiction, I should say.
Mhm.
And so I mean, just thinking about what the United States with all the reality TV shows, which
Mhm.
what was it? The Apprentice was a reality TV show, and people thought it was real. You know,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah,
y- yeah. Go ahead.
it's really interesting and almost unfortunate to see how much media shapes our own narratives of ourselves.
Mhm.
And the vast majority of us weren't represented in the media for a very long time.
Yes.
Now we see more representation, but even then, of course, what steeps in at first is what is closer to the main and dominant culture.
Hmm.
And then you sort of look at that globally, as you would have seen as well, Andrea, and then you see how much certain specific cultures are dominating the global narrative.
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. It's true, and it's as DEI is spreading globally, which I'm loving that it
Up.
has a global lens now. The dominant culture, human reaction, it's like they're scared. It's fear as to that's causing all the backlash on DEI, and uh, like in the United States, like our federal government here,
Hmm.
uh, dismantling some DEI initiatives and efforts and
Yeah.
leaving it up to the states. It's
Well,
it's um it's all fear based and power
yeah.
based, and because as humans, there's a lot of humans that crave power, and sometimes
Hmm.
it's unconsciously, they
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
realize it.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah.
I completely agree with you. And I actually think I'm a very practical and pragmatic person. As much as I love human beings and as much as I love the idea of equity, I'm also very
Hmm.
practical about it. And so I personally think it's very short sighted to
Hmm.
be against DEI because the
Yeah.
reality is that it has been proven that
Yeah.
it also improves the bottom line.
Yeah.
And you and I know all creativity is on the other side of
Hmm.
psychological safety. And
Yes.
so I think beyond fear, I think there is something about entitlement, and there's also something about this desire to keep things the same, which is going
Hmm.
to backfire in the long term.
Yeah.
Because I think human nature is about growth, right?
Yeah,
We can't
definitely.
stay stagnant.
Mhm. It's like, I'm gonna compare it to like an organization. Oh, we've always done it this way. It's like, yeah, but you can implement this software and it'll change it and make it so much quicker. But we've always done it this way. It's sort of like the same mentality. It's
Absolutely.
worked before, even though it's not efficient or
Mhm.
and in this case with DEI inclusive. So
Yeah. Yeah,
but
absolutely. And
yeah, go ahead.
the truth is I can understand that. Like when I was a younger version of myself was very much risk averse and
Mhm.
really hated change. I mean, I love change, and yet there were parts of me that held so strongly to status quo. And
Mhm.
so I can understand it as an impulse. I guess where I struggle with it is when it becomes a sort of ingrained position because it doesn't make sense for it to be an
Yeah,
ingrained position. There
yeah,
is no there is no data to substantiate it as an ingrained position.
yeah. You're right. I mean, all the data shows opposite. I mean, it's
Absolutely.
and I hate to say this, but part of me, it's almost like we're going to see more improvements in the next generation as people start aging out.
Mhm.
And and so when it comes to DEI and other um, positive efforts around the globe, global warming, and maybe not even global warming, because global warming we need to address. I mean, now, but we're not going to see
It's urgent.
the
Yeah.
positive effects until hopefully of all the efforts, so we don't stop it, stop our efforts until the next generation or beyond.
Yeah.
So
And I think that's the case for most of the challenges that we're navigating globally. I think our risk aversion as human beings has made it that we only address change when it becomes a matter of survival. And
yeah.
we're now in a place where a lot of the social fabric is needing change because
Yeah.
it's becoming about survival, about
Mhm.
sustainability. And I think on some issues, we've even passed the alarm bell stage. And it's really,
Yeah.
it's
Mhm.
change is needed. It's needed
50
yesteryear.
years, yeah, 50 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah. And so
Yeah.
I mean, I think there is hope there, but I think a lot of us who are doing this work, and certainly for myself doing this work with a peace lens, I do it with the belief that I will not see the results by the
Mhm.
end of my lifetime. But I believe our children and our grandchildren are going to see that change. I think we are planting important seeds that are going to benefit society as a whole, but much further down the line. It is unfortunate, though, that we're having to go through so much challenge in our social fabric to wake up.
I agree. I agree. And um, yeah, there's always going to be challenge people that will uh, fight against initiatives and policy changes and all. But for those in the work like you and I, it's what keeps us going is that we know that it's going to happen, and that it's going to benefit um, our future or the future, whether it be our uh, future generations of our family. I was going to say ancestors. That's the wrong way, but future generations of our family, or the future just the future at large. And yeah, so let's get back to some of your work, and also how does your leadership model, as outlined in your book, contribute to creating cultures of well-being, belonging, and peace?
Well, I think the first thing that it does is it debunks some myths. There is this sort of myth that we have in the leadership field that leadership is about technical skills. The
Hmm.
reality is, leadership has very little to do with technical skills, especially in this day and age. We've all mastered technical skills, and yet we're still facing the same problems we had 50 years ago in the field. And so I think the evolution of leadership and the edge of leadership is about being, it's about becoming a different type of leader. And those skills can only be found in being and what we call right brain practices, right? Again, research shows how much of decision making is made only based on left brain decision making. And research also shows how much that costs organizations and individuals.
Yeah.
And so, as long as leaders are trying to push through problems with only the limited skill set that they had, we're going to keep recreating the same solutions or the same lack of solutions, right? And
Hmm.
so, I think the first step to look at is to recognize that what we've done so far is not working. We can't scale it. It is not
Yeah.
scalable in terms of giving us well being. Leaders are really in burnout, they are struggling with the very real and multiple things that are changing in the workplace and the workforce.
Mm.
We have younger generations coming in, we have AI that's changing the way we work, we have global mobility that's increasing post COVID. And so becoming agile, I think, is urgent. It's no longer a choice.
I
And
agree.
what
Yep, so
I
go
would
ahead.
imagine you've seen it as well in your work, right?
Hmm. Oh, I
And
have.
so, yeah, and so what my leadership model does is it starts to reframe those beliefs, and then it gives the skills, it equips the skills to really start to be present as a leader and to be able to bring sort of a balance and harmony to our left and right brain functions so that
I
leaders
love
can
it.
not only be present, but also be connected to possibilities and opportunities. Because again, as you and I know, every crisis is an opportunity if we're willing to see beyond the crisis. But we can only do that when we're sitting there with a regulated nervous system, which means we're not in fight or flight, which means we're present. And presence comes from practices like meditation, practices that help leaders to really be connected to who they are. It's not technical skills, it's skills about being. And so while we work on that, we also work on how do we build trust? How do we build psychological safety? How do we build self-leadership? Really, that is the core of it. How do we lead? How do we self-lead ourselves from a lens, again, of trauma-informed work? Because there is so much trauma that is coming to the surface. Again, we can no longer just push it under the rug and move on. And it's just not, it doesn't work. It's not productive. A traumatized employee does not have the physical ability to produce results.
I agree. And the more, as you said, we're becoming more globalized, and unfortunately, with all the wars in the world, that we're getting more refugees sent that are coming into different countries. That, of course, are going to have a lot. I mean, very recent PTSD, and so working as a leader with a trauma-informed lens, and any leaders and all manage, actually everybody in an organization and educational institution, whether it be a classroom, needs to have that have empathy, and come not, and I cannot talk today. Oh my gosh, I apologize. And has to have empathy, and as your book had said, also pause, stop and pause before they react. And that's where you had said, like, don't fight or flee or freeze. Pause, assess the situation. I'm not like, don't take an hour or more. I mean, assess the situation and then respond. If you do need to leave, let them know that, don't just walk away, because that will look like fleeing. But yeah, because then we can use that whole brain leadership, self-leadership, as you had mentioned in your book, which I loved, by the way.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we really need to build those skills. And, I've seen things, for example, I've had conversations with leaders that the conversation started with my employees are unproductive and I think I have an incompetent employee. And on the other side of that conversation, having heard what the leader was talking about, I would say, well, I think what I'm hearing is more a trauma response than incompetence. And the leader actually had a conversation with their employee, and the employee decided to open up and they got them support. And 6 months later, they were a top performer.
That's awesome. Yeah, and that goes back to what I had mentioned, that I think it was before we started the podcast. We assume the worst as humans.
Absolutely.
It's just in our nature, and we don't get the facts. We don't talk to the individual. We don't assess, and we just assume. And assumptions are often wrong. And so we're not coming from a human-centered, human-focused mindset when we're doing that. So
yeah, absolutely. You asked me earlier why I started Conscious Togetherness.
Yes.
And this is precisely why I realized that even with our best intentions, if we do not have the know-how, we will not be able to be a positive presence in workplaces or in our communities. And so that's the gap that I bridge. It's while my leadership model is in many ways evolutionary, it is very, very practical. It's very much about how do we build trust? How do we build flow within teams? It's very much about the tangible skills of how do we operate from the here and now, looking at the bigger picture, and how do we take responsibility as an individual, as a leader, for what's happening within our team, or as an organization for the larger ecosystem that we work within, right? And I really think that is the only way that we can create sustainable shifts for, future generations.
I agree. I agree. And so when did just to sort of when did you found Conscious Togetherness?
I think it was about 2019. I
Oh,
had a
okay. Yeah.
first, yeah, so I had a first organization which was mainly a coaching and consulting business, but mainly coaching called
Hmm.
Empower from Within. And at some point, I just felt like it's time to sort of move to the next chapter. And I was
Yes.
speaking with one of
Yes.
my friends and mentors that I mentioned in the book, Martin Root. And
Hmm.
as we were speaking, he's also the founder of Project Heaven on Earth, which is a beautiful initiative.
I
And
loved that exercise at the end, right after that. Is I'm going to do it. I'm going to reread your book,
yeah,
by the way, and do all the exercise.
yeah,
So,
it's really, I like that we have real exercise in the book, and so people can
mhm.
already start this work in their workplaces. They don't necessarily need the support of either a coach or a consultant, although it does add value, but at least there is
Yes.
enough to start. And so, yeah, so in my conversation with Martin, as he was reflecting back what I was saying, the words conscious togetherness came up.
Ah, interesting. You're like, ding.
It was one of those aha moments. Yeah.
Nice, nice. So y'all are based in Canada, but you work with over the world globally, right?
Yes, I do work globally. One of the hats that I wear is a coach trainer with a school that's certified by the International Coaching Federation, and that's out of India. And we have global cohorts. And in my work personally with Conscious Togetherness as a consultant, I have worked with people from different continents, from different backgrounds.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, it is very much a global, I would say, organization. My work is global. And it's something that I absolutely love about my work because I
That's
think there
awesome.
is so much richness in diversity. And it honestly took me a long time to embrace that, to embrace the richness of diversity. It
Mhm.
wasn't always easy for me to sit with people who have different value systems or different mindsets. And so I've come to really appreciate that process. And now it kind of feels like a treat.
That's awesome. Yeah, because sometimes you just gotta agree to disagree with people
That's
and
absolutely
move on, like move
true.
on to the next topic. When it comes to empowering marginalized communities, what are some practical steps that organizations or individuals can take to empower marginalized communities and foster inclusivity?
Well, I think the biggest step is to acknowledge systemic racism, to truly acknowledge systemic racism, because if an employee is working within an organization that suppresses that reality,
Hmm.
then they're being re traumatized. And if they're working in an organization that acknowledges it but doesn't do the work that's needed to do it, they're still probably being re traumatized to a certain level. It may be a
That's
little bit
true.
lighter, but it's still re traumatization.
Mm.
And so I think the first step is to truly acknowledge, and the second step is to take responsibility for changing the landscape in the workplace. And again, just recognizing that this is both about the human and the outcomes, because I honestly don't think organizations are willing to do this work just for people. And that could just
Mm.
be the skeptical parts of me, it could be the very practical parts of me. But I
Mhm.
always say, do DEI work, if not for people, for the bottom line, but do it with
Yeah,
heart and do it with integrity.
I agree. And especially in capitalistic societies, there's going to be organizations that just want the profit margin, and diversity definitely improves the profit margin. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm
yes.
like, any well informed leader who has done their work will understand that this is for the betterment of their organization.
Hmm. Yeah.
And then on the more practical levels, I would say definitely having affinity groups is something that helps employees, right?
Hmm.
Being able to have a space to relate to people who are like you, who go through similar struggles. Uh, and also really having allyship. For me, I think about DEI work as a heart-centered DEI. I think if we do it from any other lens, we're kind of recreating the old conflicts just in a
Yeah.
different way. And so
Mhm.
I think building capacity for marginalized communities to um, take responsibility also for the difficult things that they've experienced, but have the space to work through them and find strategies.
Yeah.
One of the, like, there are so many simple things, like, um, for myself, one of the things that I've done, and this is very simple and it may sound very silly, but in my mind, it really helps me to come back to my center and realize that, no, I'm also going to treat myself like an equal, because I didn't always have that.
Yeah.
But a very simple thing has been to ask Canadians who have been here for more than a generation, when they ask me, where are you from? I ask
Mm-hmm.
them, where are you from? Where is your family from? Right? And
Mm-hmm.
it's not from a lens of, blaming or saying like, this is a microaggression and I'm upset, but
Mm-hmm.
it's just saying, you know what, we've all immigrated here.
Yeah.
Like, I understand your curiosity. I'm also curious about you. When did you immigrate here? What is your family history that brings us to who you are today?
Yeah, I mean, that's a wonderful strategy. I don't think that's silly at all, because then that simple question could also open up their eyes, like,
Absolutely.
and so it's like, oh, yeah, my family hails from Germany or something like that, and Germany and Scotland or something. Yeah. So
Right.
yeah, wonderful. And when it comes to the affinity groups, to me, it's very important um, for organizations to let their teams know that, hey, you do not need to be a part of this group. I mean, like, you don't have to identify as that group to join the affinity group. So you can have like an Anglo white Saxon, male join the Black uh, affinity group, Black professionals affinity group, or the Latinx affinity group,
Mhm.
professionals affinity group, because that allows them to learn more
Yeah,
about those cultures and struggles and challenges that some their colleagues might be facing that they're unaware of, because
yeah,
they might be coming from a more privileged um, uh, background automatically because of their sex or their skin color or their religion. So
absolutely. Absolutely.
yeah,
And we don't know what we don't know, right? Like, we can
exactly.
only know once we have these conversations with people.
Hmm.
I think there are certain organizations where perhaps the conversation can be still young and raw, and so, having that kind of dialogue or exchange can take a little bit of working up to. But definitely, there's a
Hmm.
lot of value in having these
Hmm.
conversations, I believe, in a very open way.
Hmm.
When I'm working with groups, I always say, we inherited this, we didn't create it.
Yeah.
Like, we're in this mess together. And so
Hmm.
we're not here to blame each other and shame each other.
Hmm.
But we are here to say, this is where we are today. This is the impact of what created us socially speaking and culturally speaking. Now, how do we equalize the playing field? How do we make sure that each one of us is valued?
Hmm.
Because
Yeah.
it's not about exceptionalizing one group over the other. That's never going to work in the long term. That it
Hmm.
is about, how do we equalize the playing field? And to some of the people who at times are not happy about that, I say, well, technically, if you believe in equality, you already believe we're there. All you're
Yeah.
going to be doing is listening to how, for some people, we're not yet there. But
Oh,
what harm is
that's a
it
good
going to
suggestion.
do? You already
Yeah.
think we're there. So it's not going to change
Hmm.
much.
Yeah. Like, chime in. um, yeah, that's a wonderful suggestion, actually. Um, uh, but I was also thinking, like, people who join the affinity groups that don't identify as that group can also show the allyship
Absolutely.
as well. So,
Absolutely.
yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important. And again, I think there is a time and a place for the affinity group being exclusive. I think that is
Hmm.
important in
Of
some
course.
ways.
Yes. Yes.
And then there's a time and a place, obviously, for those open conversations and for people to join
Hmm.
affinity groups, for
I
sure.
agree. So, speaking about allyship and affinity groups, in your experience, what are some effective strategies for individuals to become allies to marginalized groups, with the exception of affinity groups, since we already talked about
Yeah, well, I think there's nothing that beats trust and openness. And so, for people who are of privileged identities or dominant identities, as we
that?
call
Hmm.
them, who really want to be allies, I think it starts with building trust, with being open and honest with each other, with recognizing, again, we don't know what we don't know, being open to feedback. There are certain times where I have seen allies develop enough agility in this context that they're able to recognize that a microaggression just took place, and they know you enough to know this is somewhere where I need to intervene, or this is somewhere where the person's got it. I don't need to do anything. And sometimes we mess it up. And so that's where trust is important, because then having conversations, and even for myself, I mean, I've worked on delicate issues at times, of course, in DEI. And there are times that I've had to call colleagues and say, I need to have a one-on-one conversation because there's something I'm in a trauma trigger right now, and I need a safe space to process it before I can move into the brave space that is the collective space. Right? And I think that builds that knowledge, that understanding. And with my husband, when we started these conversations, I mean, there are times that neither one of us understood why I was in a trauma response, right? Like I literally started from, this isn't even a thing. And I didn't even know about systemic racism when I started my journey. And so it was an eye-opening thing on many levels, especially for someone who's trained in the legal field, and I believed in equality, and to recognize that yes, equality is a concept, but we're not yet there, right?
The laws are not equal, or
there's a gap.
And they're not. What's the word? People are not treated equally under the same law. So.
Exactly. Or even if we're treated equally, sometimes that still perpetuates the equity piece, right? The inequity piece, right?
Yep.
And so it was a rude awakening, I will say, to be honest. But it is about building that ability for myself to hold myself in that, to process that, to work with that, and then to build the strength to speak my truth. It's one of the things that I think we can empower ourselves with as those who identify as marginalized communities. It is to build the muscle to speak our truth and believe in people's ability to receive it.
I love that. And knowing that people are complex and they fall under more than one identity.
Absolutely. Intersectionality is very real.
Yes. Yes. So let's move on to trauma-informed leadership. And I want to be a little conscious of time. I know we're getting close. So could you elaborate on the concept of trauma-informed lead? Actually, I want to ask you about this. In the Conscious Togetherness Leadership Framework, what tools do you use to guide leaders in creating a more equitable, peaceful, and prosperous world?
Well, I think the biggest thing that I use is experiential learning. And what that means is a lot of the learning happens on the other side of experience. And the reality is we've all had difficult situations in our lives, right? I don't think there's anyone that I've met that hasn't had a difficult situation.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I do is build on when leaders from, say, privileged identities are going through difficult moments. I bring the learning of trauma into that, and how trauma is so deeply subjective. Yeah. And usually when we're doing work in a context of DEI, then I ask them to sort of imagine what that response is like when it's amplified 100 times for someone who's carrying generational trauma, for example. Right? There's, of course, the education piece about what is trauma really? What does it look like? What are the implications of it? And what do we do with it together as a collective? And some of it is education, some of it is real life strategies, and some of it is, at times it's for organizations to see, what are we going to do with this in terms of policies? How does this translate into our well-being policy? How does it translate into when employees need some time off, for example? And so those conversations are important to not only be made space for, but also to be held, I think, with the understanding of what are we really talking about? And also the responsibility piece on the other side of that. I always think that we're trying to balance accountability and compassion. right? And so how do we make sure that we create an ecosystem that can hold those two, not necessarily
Hmm.
in tension, but with harmony?
Yeah. Hmm. I would love to sit in on one of those sessions. Nice. Cool. That was a wonderful answer. I mean, yeah, I definitely need to delve into your conscious togetherness website a little more and look at your programs because sounds like and just from your book and reading through your website a little bit before, you really utilize your self experience and your education and I mean and um, to have a very holistic approach to empowering people to be self leaders and to be conscious leaders. And it's just it's very beautiful. So I'm glad
Thank
that
you.
you're welcome. I'm glad that you
Thank
you
you.
had that aha moment.
Yeah, thank you. And to be
You're
honest, it
welcome.
wasn't something that was easy or simple. When I first wrote the book, I had it written before I sent it to a publisher, and my publisher read it, and she said to me, "You have an amazing framework, but you're going to lose your reader at page 2." And I was shocked. I was like, "What do you mean?"
Page
She's like,
two.
"Yes," and she said, "There isn't enough of you in it." And so when I wrote this book, my
Mm-hmm.
experiences were not in it. It was very
Oh,
much, and trained as a lawyer, I'm very
mm.
much trained to dissect
Get to the
facts,
fact.
look
Yeah.
at the data, make an argument. And so she said to me, people need to know who you are. And it
Yeah.
took me some inner work to be able to be that vulnerable and open. Now I'm very open about it and it's easy and simple, but it took some work. But I
Yeah.
can
I
see
believe
now,
it.
for example, with one of the identities I hold is being a Muslim. And, with the Israel Palestine conflict, I'm
Mm-hmm.
part of a group that started an initiative for radical empathy across the Muslim Jewish
Ooh,
divide.
I love that
And
term, radical empathy. I'm sorry. This is wonderful.
yeah, no,
Mm,
absolutely. And, at a time where there's so much turmoil,
okay.
to be able to create a space where
Mm,
people can have safety to speak what needs
mm,
to be spoken, where there is this realization that we need a different path forward, is not something I could have done 10 years ago because I would have myself been so deep into the trauma of it.
mhm.
And so today I see how these skills that are about being really are what it allows us to make different choices and different outcomes.
Oh, wow. That is just so powerful. I'm just, wow. And I could see that just as humans in general, it does take for many of us, especially uh, um, who are born of the female gender, um, we're conditioned to in certain cultures we're conditioned to behave a certain way
Absolutely.
and also it's which makes us could make us very introverted and shy and hesitant
Mhm.
to speak
Yeah.
our voice, our minds. So
Mhm.
I mean, just reading your story also, which I your agent was very correct in that. I mean, that's what makes this book so powerful is your story. And even more powerful, I should say, not so far, but even more powerful is having your story in there. So
Thank
yeah,
you.
and
So
you're
I'll
welcome.
send a shout out to Amanda, my publisher, from Saved by Story. Thank you. And
You're welcome.
if I may just add a little thing, Andrea,
Sure.
there about allyship, because we're talking about allyship and,
Hmm.
we're talking about the global context. And the initiative that I'm a part of is called Heal Together. And it was started by an American colleague of mine, who brought me together with a Jewish teacher of emotional intelligence because we're both colleagues and friends of his. Um, and so that also speaks to what happens when we come together as a collective across different identities. And to me, he truly embodies what it's like to be the identity in the middle, trying to hold both the identities there in conflict, and yet really bring them to a space where there's true dialogue.
And yeah, that's actually very difficult, but it's very needed. So those crucial
Absolutely.
conversations, bringing people together in a safe space to have those crucial and difficult conversations. to allow
Absolutely.
for growth and healing and understanding is important, not just for trauma, but for the DEI space as well. And in
Absolutely.
any type of disagreements. So,
Absolutely. And I think the benefit of this initiative is that, I mean, my colleague Andy Swindler is his name, who started the Heal Together initiative with his wife Rachel Zargo, are the co founders of Feel Real. And they are both deeply steeped in social justice work in the US. And so we have an initiative where we have, identities that are in deep conflict in the world, and yet held by people who are all trained in emotional intelligence work with a DEI lens, and all steeped deeply in purpose. Andy and I are colleagues from the True Purpose Institute, so purpose is really at the center of all the work we do. And so I think that's a recipe that a lot of organizations are trying to implement. A lot of
mhm.
organizations are trying to move towards a more purpose driven lens. And I just think this really validates that that direction truly works. It's, people just need to be committed. These are difficult times. We all know that. And it is more critical than ever to have that courage and that ability to step into difficult conversations, because on the other side is so much brighter for all of us.
I agree. I agree. So I want to be cognizant of time. So, because I know you have another
Thank you.
uh,
Yes.
appointment. So,
Change tonight.
um, so how can people get a hold of you?
The easiest way is on my website, so
Mhm.
conscioustogetherness.com. They can find my services both for consulting work and for speaking engagements. A lot of organizations like to start out with a speaking engagement before we move into a larger consulting
Okay.
contract. And so they can fill out the forms. They're right there on the website, and
Right.
I can reach out to them and look forward to meeting the people who are going to reach out to me.
Great, awesome. And I will, at the end of this, once at the end of the recording, before I post it, I will have a slide with your website and your
Thank you.
LinkedIn profile, if you're okay with that.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. Thank you.
Cool. All right. So let me just do some quick key takeaways. So we discussed empowering and marginalized communities. We talked about some strategies for empowering marginalized communities and fostering inclusivity within organizations and society at large. We discussed the importance of conscious leadership and equity-driven approaches. Creating bridges. We talked about creating bridges to allyship. We talked about the concept of allyship and its role in supporting marginalized communities. And we talked about some techniques for building bridges and becoming an ally. We talked about trauma-informed leadership, its significance of this. We talked about the significance of trauma-informed leadership in creating psychologically safe spaces for individuals from
Mhm.
marginalized backgrounds. And we explored how trauma-informed approaches can enhance well-being, belonging, and effectiveness within teams and organizations. Cultural adaptability and equity, we discussed the importance of this in leadership and its impact on creating inclusive environments. And we talked about some equity driven strategies. And we talked about purposeful leadership and well-being. We talked about the connection between purposeful leadership, well-being, and organizational success. And we talked about how aligning personal and organizational purpose can lead to increasing fulfillment, productivity, and flow within teams.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I will have some possible next steps for the listeners at the end of the podcast on the slide, but these will include topics of education and awareness, action and advocacy, community building, leadership development, and application and implementation. So thank you so much for
Thank
coming on my
you.
podcast, Kawtar. I wish we
It
could
was a
talk
pleasure.
longer. I was really enjoying
Me
this
too.
conversation.
Me too. Thank you so much, Andrea. It's been a
I'm
true
very
pleasure talking
welcome.
to you.
Likewise, likewise. Listeners, please stay tuned. This episode episode number 5 will be published March 7th at 7 p.m. on my podcast channel. Our next episode will be talking about equity. Um, just equity at large. So, and that will be episode 6. So stay tuned for that. Kawtar, again, thank you so much. I hope you
Thank
have a lovely evening, and
you too.
I hope you can come back anytime. You're
Thank you
always
so
welcome.
much.
So just ping me whenever you're ready.
I will do that. Thank you so much, Andrea.
Thank
All the
you.
best. Wish you lots of success with the
Thank you.
podcast.
Thank you so much. Now go out there and make a difference. And as always, for more strategies on building inclusive workplaces and communities, check out Diversifuse. We're here to guide you on your DEI journey. Make sure to visit our website at diversifused.com and follow us on social media for the latest happenings, blog posts, tips, and events.